There are 215 emitters currently subject to this safeguard mechanism. You say you're talking to industry who are not happy with it. Which companies currently subject to this regulation are not happy with the way Labor's proceeding?
Well, Tom, I won't be speaking on the behalf of a particular business without their permission. They're putting their own submissions together. But I'll give you an example if you like. I was only down at Bell Bay in Tasmania recently and visiting their smelter. That business alone has around about $60 million with just wages in the local jobs alone. We cannot have major businesses like that, their competitiveness being eroded because Labor is not only failing to address the issue of power prices, but introducing a new tax. And Tom, look,
this is precisely though one of those industries, isn't it, that's being looked into, and it would be so-called trade protected, that they'd be able to offset them in ways that wouldn't disadvantage them compared to the rest of the world. This is a specific part of what Labor's proposing.
Well, it's Labor conceding that their tax is going to erode Australian competitiveness. If anything, that is a concession. Now, if I can, Tom, just pick you up on something you said before. Labor have been very tricky, I grant them that, very sneaky in trying to use an existing mechanism created by the coalition. But they are changing that mechanism. They're turning it on its head. They are making it a tax. And that is what the concern is. Now, of course, there's been a lot of news with the industry of late saying, well, hang on, what about trade-exposed industries? Labor, of course, is now saying, oh, OK, maybe it does count. And this goes to the heart of one of the problems. This isn't just about weakening communities, compromising jobs and industry. It risks eroding Australia's competitiveness. Now, we are talking about manufacturing here. On the back of COVID, for how many years now have we been talking about this as a nation to build our sovereign capability? Does this strengthen it or weaken it? Does it impose more tax or alleviate pressure? We know the answers to that.
You said Labor turns it on its head, it's now a tax. It was always this design, it's just being ratcheted down. So it was always the possibility that companies would pay or have to offset their emissions. That hasn't changed. But let me just ask...
But the ratcheting has, and that's why it becomes a tax.
Sure, we'll get to that moment.
That's why it becomes a tax, because it was initially introduced by the coalition.
Well, it was always a tax, but companies weren't paying.
It was not always a tax.
It
never has been a tax. I reject that absolutely. Labor is making it a tax. It was never a tax.
Under the coalition,
Labor's criticism, Tom, Labor's criticism of this...
let me put this to you.
Can I make this point, Tom?
Let me put this to you. Let me put this to you. Say it was never a tax. If companies under the previous coalition went above the amount where the safeguard mechanism was set, they would have paid, would they not?
Indeed, they would have, Tom.
So it was a tax.
So hear me out, if you may, right? So we had the Emissions Reduction Fund. Now, when that was introduced, we need to make sure that we sent a signal to heavy industry that we did not want their emissions to go through the roof to compromise the emissions reduction. Therefore, we introduced what's referred to as a safeguard mechanism. Now, the objective, you're right, there would be a penalty if they exceeded it, but the objective was not to collect tax. Labor is treating this as an opportunity to collect tax. And this is why industry is so concerned. That is why we have public debate throughout the nation now concerned about our trade-exposed industries, because they know that they're going to be taxed. And this is the last thing they need. It's the last thing Australia needs for our economy.
Okay, so obviously both the Labor and the Coalition have agreed to net zero by 2050. If this safeguard mechanism doesn't change at all and these companies can keep emitting as they do today with business as normal, other industries would have to reduce their emissions by more. Is that fair?
With respect, Tom, I actually disagree with the presumption of your question. We are talking about industries that are using technology today to reduce their emissions. And they are doing the most extraordinary job. And I've been seeing that in action over the last few weeks on the ground, in the factories, in the smelters. They are applying technologies to reduce emissions. We need to allow them the headroom to drive more technology innovation so they can not just get emissions down, but grow. So they can also ensure that regional areas remain strong, that the Australian economy builds its sovereign capability. That's what they have been doing to date. They need to be encouraged to do that. They don't need a new tax. It's the wrong way.
But if these 215,
tax.